regulate the river, to harness the river, control the river. All these metaphors are used for this idea that we have to control this wild force. And there's one concept which dam builders often like to say is that we have to use water before it runs to waste to the sea. We cannot allow water to just run to the sea. But that's what water's supposed to do. That's what the hydrological cycle does. It's like saying, well, blood flowing to our feet is wasted, so we should cut it off at our knees. We need water to run to the oceans as part of the hydrological cycle. When we stop that, we have horrendous environmental impacts. And those environmental impacts come back to hurt us. They come back to being human impacts. Something like 1 million square kilometers of land around the world has been submerged under dams. It's about 1% of the total global land area, which is, actually that's a lot of land, but what's even more important is it's the best quality land that gets submerged. It's the land along the river valleys, and this is the land which provides the best farmland, and it's also the best ecosystems and the best wetlands and the most fertile, the most diverse forests. In a business where there's such huge amounts of money being spent, of course there's vested interest, there's huge amounts of corruption, and you get these, in terms of bureaucracies, the various irrigation ministries, all the bureaucrats and the engineers stuffed into those ministries, they need their budgets to keep going, and so it's in their interest to keep promoting new projects and keep the money flowing from the state or the central government so that they can keep their jobs and they can keep doing what they know how to do, which is building big dams and canal schemes. It's a common thing to bureaucracies. It's the same thing in the US, the dam building bureaucracies there. They went on for years and years and years, long after there was any sort of rational reason for them to be building dams, just because they were set up to build dams, so that's what they did. And if they couldn't find if there wasn't a good reason to build a dam, they would just invent one. And that's what happened in the US till finally sort of public pressure and a lack of money brought it to a halt. So dam building's really at an end now in the US. In India, that point hasn't been reached yet. It's going to be a while yet. I think you go back to the 50s, you see this ideology in India, this sort of Nehruvian ideology that we must build these big projects, we're going to progress, we're going to become like the Western nations, we're going to industrialize, and to do that we need these big projects, big dams, produce electricity, big irrigation, and people were thinking in this, with big things we can really change this country, we can do things. A lot of the guys that now still run the irrigation ministries in the States and in the center in Delhi, they're people that are educated at that time. They were sort of trained in that way of thinking, and they're not prepared to change. They're just a few of them. There is a few water bureaucrats in India that have really become quite enlightened and have said, look, this hasn't worked. We got to think of a different way of doing things, and that is very encouraging. But there's still this core of these old style guys that are still stuck in this 1950s technology, this 1950s way of doing things. And I think probably until those people retire and some new people come on and there is some new thinking about, first of all, to admit that this big approach hasn't worked, and then to look at, okay, what's viable in terms of small scale decentralized approaches, what's actually happening around the country in terms of what the NGOs, communities are doing, recharging groundwater and so on. And when that happens, there's some signs of it happening, then the power of the dam lobby in India can be broken, and then there can be a solution to the water problems in India. First of all, it's important to classify what is the drought. Is this a natural drought or is this a human-caused drought? There's a lot of very good research being done in India to show how much this is human-caused, that what's happened because of the degradation of watersheds, because of deforestation and poor land use practices, that the flooding problem the drought problem and the flooding problem have both got much worse, because when there used to be vegetation in place there to hold the water and to hold the soil, the vegetation has been degraded, and so you have the water is running off and the soil is also running off. You also have this terrible problem in India of groundwater mismanagement, whereby the groundwater is pumped. Farmers get free electricity, so they basically just pump like hell, and the water is the groundwater is being sucked out of the water tables of India, and that's a massive problem, and so that causes droughts where there's not actually any less rainfall than there used to be, but what there is there's no more groundwater because it's been overused by the farmers. Flood control is said to be one of the major benefits of dams. I actually think that it's a cost of dams. I think if you were to do a worldwide analysis of the impacts of dams and floods, you would find that they've made floods worse on a worldwide basis. I think there's individual dams that you could point at, and you would probably say that flooding downstream since that dam has been built is now less damaging than before. But I think there's many other dams where we see flooding downstream is more damaging than before. And there may be less floods than there previously were, but those floods which do happen, they come quicker, they drain away slower. Big problem is that there will be more development on the floodplain because people think they are protected. They get a false sense of security. So a dam is built, for 10 years there's no floods, you get development, industrial development, people move there. And then a big flood comes, the dam can't hold it. It has to open its gates and whoosh, you get huge damage downstream. And this is a big problem in California, many other parts of the world. And you look around the world, India, China, in Europe, in the US, there's a pattern. Countries are spending more and more and more money in flood control in terms of dams and embankments. At the same time, the amount of damage from floods is steadily going up every year. Huge numbers of people, and nobody has any idea how many. It's very hard to count, have been very seriously impacted by the loss of floods downstream, by the loss of the normal annual floods. Especially a problem in Africa, where people along African rivers like the Niger and the Zambezi and the Senegal River have depended for millennia on the natural rise and fall of the water, and their agricultural system is geared to that, and they depend on the fish and forests, other resources of the floodplain. But when that flood is wiped out, or the flood is changed so that it comes less frequency and then it comes in all of a sudden in a rush, or it comes at a different time, it changes that whole system, and the fisheries decline, the agriculture goes into decline. Big problem with health impacts.